Hey everybody, welcome to Readers That Write. Today we're going to start a little bit of a series to talk about something that is big in my industry, both of my industries, in cybersecurity and in writing. And it's kind of turned into a joke in the cybersecurity industry, and that's how the cybersecurity industry is portrayed in everything from books to Hollywood to pretty much any other medium, and how absolutely wrong it is. So I'm going to start a short series to teach you guys how to portray the cybersecurity industry correctly. Today's going to be the basic overview, and then we'll get into details over the next few episodes. So stay tuned after the jump, and we'll get into it. Hey everybody, welcome back. We have a super exciting episode, for me at least, to talk about how Hollywood does hacking wrong, and for in general the cybersecurity industry, and what it actually looks like, so that you guys can write it well and still write it good. The big complaint we often hear from authors and writers is that doing it the quote-unquote correct way would be boring. And that is absolutely not true. There's several different ways you can write a hacker into a story and make them, A, not just the typical MacGuffin, and B, make them interesting and what they're doing interesting. It just comes down to a little bit of an understanding of what that world looks like. So we're going to dive into that, and I guess not dive into it's probably the wrong analogy there. We're going to get into it slowly by first talking about what hacking actually is. So hacking is the intrusion into someone's personal information. That is it. It does not matter whether that is physically, digitally, vocally. Any way a person gets someone else's personal information is technically hacking, which is a much broader scope than most people realize. And they deal with hacking attempts on their personal information far more regularly than people think they do. Now, to be clear, the line is typically drawn where physically stealing an individual person's information isn't technically considered hacking, because that could also go to include things like pickpockets. That is typically where the line is drawn. That being said, if there's personal and private data and it is stolen from a business, that is typically considered hacking. So most modern heists would include some element of hacking. So now that we've got that cleared up, there's a lot of different things involved in different types of hacking attempts. I want to be clear, I am not going to teach anyone how to do that. This is not going to be a detailed information on how hacking attempts are actually done in a step-by-step manner. I'm going to give you the basic overview so that you have enough information to write a plausible hacker or someone in the cybersecurity industry that is actively working to prevent that hacker. There are three categories when it comes to the different types of hackers, and we'll do an individual episode on each of them. You have the white hats, like me, who are people who actively try and stop hackers. The best way to think of them is they're basically the virtual police of a company, or the virtual security of a company. Their job is to catch, redirect, or stop any type of intrusion coming into that company's systems. A lot of times that is done behind the scenes and without anyone knowing. Typically, they're one of the departments inside a company that the less you see them, the better. Because if they are involved in company affairs, that usually means either something massive is happening or something bad has happened. So a lot of times they will be the mysterious guy in the cave of the office. Their office often typically has some kind of comic or cartoon reference or anime or something on the front door. They often sit in a little bit darker rooms, not always. Sometimes they'll be in a bullpen by themselves. But typically, this group is not heavily involved with the rest of the company on a regular basis. They may do trainings with the rest of the company, and they may be involved with the board and high-level management on a regular basis. But typically, the average employee doesn't even know they exist. And that's kind of how they want it. And I guess I shouldn't say they, I should say we, because I am part of this group. White hats are the ones who have sometimes a college degree, sometimes certifications, typically have an IT background, and are paid fairly decent money by companies to protect them. The next group is what most people would call a hacker, and that in the industry they're referred to as red hats. Red hats are the bad guys, 100% plain and simple. They have malicious intent. They're intending to do bad things with anything they acquire. These guys aren't the trustworthy type. That being said, some of them have good motives for doing it. There's several different groups out there that call themselves hacktivists that technically fall into the red hat category that are not the same as other red hats. They're often doing something to expose government corruption or expose something along those lines. As a white hat, I still have to stop them, but they are far less dangerous than malicious hacking. Malicious hacking can come from state-sponsored actors. Typically, we see a lot of Eastern countries participating in this, as well as former Soviet countries. They're typically where we see this coming from. I'm not going to name names. I don't want to cause problems. But there's a lot of state-sponsored hacking coming from those organizations. That being said, most nations do employ some type of cyber warfare unit. These guys are technically red hats. While they only target specific government organizations and military structures, they are malicious in their intent and are de facto red hats. Sometimes that line can be blurred in the cyber warfare sense. It's a little bit more complicated in that role. White hats and red hats tend to go back and forth and sometimes do both jobs, because it then becomes a little bit more like the FBI and the CIA during the 80s when they were doing all of the spy hunts in the year of the spy and things like that, where a lot of times they would end up having to work together to actively thwart an incoming attack while also orchestrating an attack in response. And oftentimes those analogies are pretty common. It's actually where the white hat, red hat, black hat, and gray hat come from, is an old spy cartoon. And red hats and black hats is a very gray line as well. I've heard dozens of different definitions. Most of the time, black hats are referred to as red hats, and red hats are referred to as black hats. Both have malicious intent. My understanding is the original part of that was red hats would go beyond just hacking, and black hats typically were the shadowy steal your data type, while the red hats would typically be criminal organizations. Now, I have heard that dozens of different ways, including in cybersecurity classes. So I don't think there's a clear definition between red hats and black hats, which is why I just lumped them together for this segment. But those are often the definition. Typically, the red hat can have blood involved, which is why it's considered red. Now, the last group is a very strange one that is actually really common today and isn't looked down on as much as it once was. I say that because it's a very gray area, which is why they're called gray hats. They are hackers who are freelance workers that tend to focus on large corporations and organizations. They will hack into that organization and then they will turn around and sell the method that they hacked that organization to that company. They don't steal anything in the end. They will illegally hack into an organization. Once they get in, they'll turn around, reach out to the organization and say, hey, here's how I got in. Well, if you pay me X amount of money, I'll tell you how we got in. And typically, the alternative is they will release sensitive data that's usually not good for the company publicly. And over the last, probably I'd say about 10 years, a lot of these companies have discovered that gray hats are super useful. And while white hats like me don't like the fact that they're doing that, we also understand that they also use methods that white hats don't think of to protect an organization. And it's something that is very, very interesting to see. Because while it is technically illegal, almost no company ever presses charges on a gray hat, because most of the time the gray hat comes back with an offer that's substantial financially for an individual, but for a large corporation like Microsoft or Apple, that's $20,000 to $30,000, or sometimes more, depending on what they find, is totally worth it. It's far easier to pay that gray hat and then fix and typically gray hats will actually help you fix the problem as well. So it's treated more as a subcontractor, and often it's actually written off on taxes that way. So gray hats are typically good guys who don't really have a line, or don't have as much of a line, I should say. They are typically standard in how they do things. And oftentimes nowadays, recently, companies will actually encourage it by offering bounties. Bounties are exactly what they sound like. If you've ever seen bounty hunters or watched any Star Wars movie with bounty hunters, it's where a company will offer a prize if a gray hat can get to a certain bit of information in their system. And they'll usually set a time limit. Say you have 6 months to find a file named this in our system. And if you can deliver that file to us, we'll pay you X amount of money. Typically, this is to test high-level security systems. It will be on a controlled network, so most of the company isn't exposed. But it allows a company to test systems to see how effective they are and make sure they don't have holes in them. It's a very, very effective system and has worked wonders for a lot of the major companies in the world. So gray hats also tend to fluctuate between white hats and black hats. They will work white hat jobs on occasion. They also may be tempted to do black hat stuff as well. They're very much your morally gray characters in stories, and are very, very interesting to write. It's very interesting to work with them as well. They can be some very interesting people. Okay, so now that we've got those basics, there's another big thing that I see a lot of in Hollywood and in books that is absolutely not the case. The big thing I see most often is that a hacker is a 20-something-year-old, maybe 30-something-year-old man, typically white, typically lives in his mom's basement, and has zero interaction with the world around him. While that can be true, those guys typically aren't your major hackers. Most hacks include some type of involvement with people, because the biggest flaw in any system anywhere is the people involved. Now, there are hacks that can be orchestrated from your mom's basement, and It's not uncommon, but that hasn't been the case for a long time. In most Western cultures, the job opportunities in IT and in cybersecurity make it very easy for people like that to find jobs. Because there are different types of IT jobs or software engineering jobs that can be done remotely and are regularly done remotely. A lot of those guys do that job instead. So it's not as common as it used to be. That was true-ish in the early 90s. But hacking has become a very international thing, and B, it's become a very lucrative thing for not white men. It's the best way to put that. Lately, we've seen a massive rise in hacks coming from Asia and Africa. And a lot of times, it's not even men doing them. The most dangerous hackers recently have actually been women, because they have certain abilities that allow them to get in far more easily. Just typically and statistically, from what we've seen, women are trusted far more than men. Women also have certain things that can help them get into places. For example, one of the most common types of what's called vishing or voice phishing, where it's done over the phone, is actually a woman will call and have a recording of a baby crying. That baby crying will then trigger someone to have empathy for them and want to get them off the phone as quickly as possible. And they're far more likely to provide information than if a man were to call, even with the baby crying method. If a man calls with baby crying, people don't tend to be as empathetic as they do to a woman with a baby crying who sounds frazzled. So a lot of those things have become extremely common. There's other types of hacks that women can do that men can't. And they're not hard to guess. But because of that, hackers aren't what Hollywood likes to portray them as a lot of the time. A lot of times they are not your typical cis white male who doesn't know how to talk to women and hides in their basement. And that's become an actual major problem in the cybersecurity industry because people tend to trust people who don't look like the stereotypical hacker. And that leads to major problems for the white hats because it puts us in a very awkward situation having to try and explain this to people while also not crossing any racist or misogynistic lines. So it's been a tool that has been used actively for a long time. So for all my writers out there, if you're writing a hacker, be creative. It does not have to be the slightly overweight white man who sits in a chair in his office in his mom's basement. It can literally be anybody. And I would exploit that. Some of my favorite hacker characters, as of recently, have been those different types of people. I'm not going to call it any negatives here, but one of the few representations I've seen that's actually very well done is actually in one of CBS's brand new shows, NCIS Sydney. They have a technology specialist who is not your typical hacker, and the methods she uses to extract data from things have actually been correct so far, which surprises me. NCIS gets the closest to correct hacking most of the time. But then they'll have the occasional episode where it's two people slapping fingers on one keyboard that is just hysterically wrong on so many levels. So it's very, very interesting to see some people finally understanding that you don't have to have your stereotypical guy in chair to be a hacker. And it's also been very interesting to see what type of evolutions could come if people actually started representing hackers correctly. Now, after all of this is said and done, we have so much to cover. Last week we talked about hacks that are targeted at authors. So that gives you some idea of how that world works a little bit. But over the next several weeks, we're going to be talking about these different things and processes and how it works. And I want to hear from you guys. What are some things you want to know about this world? What questions do you have? Do you have any good recommendations of stories that you think were well done when it comes to hackers? Any of that, please comment below. I want to hear from you guys, and I can't wait to see what you guys have question-wise and recommendation-wise, or any details you guys would like to know. So first, I think we're going to start with my world when it comes to episodes. We're going to start with the White Hat world. The White Hat world is extremely fascinating and is far more broad than people realize. So stay tuned. I'll see you guys next week. Hope you guys have a good new year and hopefully had a good Christmas or whatever holiday you guys celebrate. And I will see you guys next week to discuss White Hat hackers and why they make good characters and stories. Thanks for joining us.